Sam Harris defeated Jordan Peterson in a debate. And apparently there were crickets. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and did you even know that Sam Harris had not one, but two separate back-to-back debates with Jordan Peterson back in late June? They did too because they were not done talking by the end of the first 2-hour limit the venue had given them. So they set up time the next day for another 2 whole hours, and they still couldn't finish. It was pretty grisly if you could follow it, which was somewhat difficult because these guys are smart and they did not have a happy conversation. But let me back this up a bit. I've been a huge fan of Jordan Peterson as a free speech advocate, a feminist critic, a Marxist and communist critic, a critic of postmodernism, somebody who explains the psychology of all of this stuff, and a few other things that he does an excellent job of, which is what made him famous and you probably like about him. However, the whole part where he's a Christian has always been confusing to me, and I never saw a good explanation for it. He'd never really talked that much about his Christian beliefs, to the point where I always wondered whether or not he was a true believer like he says that he is. Instead, he'd usually just refer to some interesting sounding Bible stories, which is all fine and good, and then he'd spend most of his time talking about politics and socio-political issues, which is what I am interested in hearing about as an individual, and thus, I always liked him. But I was still scratching my head and thinking, so why is he a Christian? Now, don't get me wrong. I've known numerous amazingly nice Christians that were wonderful people, and I'd certainly be more inclined to hang out with a Christian than a feminist any day, because with Christians, you can at least rest assured that they will attempt to be good members of society and treat other people kindly to the best of their abilities, whereas with feminists, true believers, and often even just partial believers, generally want to topple society as we know it, and then they'll step on anybody who gets in their way, or even just anybody that says the wrong thing at the wrong time, accidentally. Honestly, being that I'm a non-Christian or religious person, though I do have some very complicated views about life and the universe that I don't want to get into, I can actually defend Christianity and its validity in the way that the structures and establishment of Christianity have done enough good in the world and refined itself to the point where at its best, Christianity isn't really harming anybody, but rather it's offering people emotional comfort and community support. People get by day to day by believing in something, and by having a community of people to hang out with that also believes in those things. So if those things also have the added bonus of telling you that it's a good idea to love thy neighbor, and if they are even willing to ignore the parts of the Bible that encourage slavery and demonize homosexuality, etc., then I'm fine with them and I can see the merit. I say this because as I reach my mid-30s, I start to think more and more that the vast majority of people will find a religion whether they are raised religious or not. So it might as well be a decent one that they find to prevent them from signing up for ISIS or becoming a wacky Marxist nihilist or something. That being said, I've always really liked Sam Harris fairly well, though I have a criticism of him from the time in which he did what I remember to be basically 180 and said that he thinks everybody should vote for Hillary Clinton instead of Trump because, basically, Trump is a no-good, super awful, icky, mean, bad man, or whatever. He didn't really explain why Trump was so evil in any great detail, and he did much worse of a job explaining why Hillary Clinton wasn't evil. You can go listen to that, it was strange. However, politics are obviously complicated. There's a lot of pressure put on celebrities to say certain things when it might cost somebody powerful an election. So I am willing to say that I am simply not entirely sure that Sam Harris really meant what he said all that much, at least for the sake of this video, and also because I don't want to go listen to hours and hours of Sam Harris talking about politics to hear if he's said any much else comparing the two politicians, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, since. I don't know. Regardless, I'm supposed to be talking about religion, so in regards to Harris, I'll just say that he's always been somebody I have completely agreed with wholeheartedly when he talks objectively about how, while he's an atheist, some religions are more destructive than others, and we can use logic and reason to determine such things. I'm entirely with him when he makes the point that nobody should be able to say that all religions are equally horrible and harmful to society, when clearly nobody is afraid of being ran over by a truck of peace driven by the Amish, or maybe horse and carriage of peace or whatever. Furthermore, I had always been waiting for a good criticism of Jordan Peterson, coming from basically anybody, because while countless people have tried to take down the reigning king of English language speaking thought, apparently all of them have failed, and usually failed completely miserably, like a meth head thinking that he could take down a bouncer at a fancy nightclub, only to find himself twitching with a concussion. Therefore, it was rather interesting when I noticed this video on the channel Philosophy Insights, where Harris was speaking on the Rubin Report about his personal criticisms of Jordan Peterson, which honestly hit the nail on the head of what I was feeling subconsciously about Peterson's inability to actually articulate why exactly he stays a devout Christian. Harris basically said that Peterson wouldn't ever actually defend Christianity, in the same way I have noticed that somebody like ContraPoints never actually defends Marxism. And that statement about how Peterson never really defends Christianity rang true to me from my understanding, and more so because it sounded like Harris actually knew the guy. So, of course, I was fascinated to find out that they had actually debated in June, though I just learned about it and watched it last night for some odd reason. I think maybe it wasn't actually even released. Truthfully, I'm going to be real with you guys and give you some spoilers. Sam Harris absolutely decimated Jordan Peterson in that debate. There's no real way of going around saying that in simple terms. If anybody tells you that Peterson even held his own in that debate, they're either an idiot that wasn't actually following what was said between the two men, which wouldn't be unlikely because it was hard to follow, or they are lying for some reason. In the debate, which was hosted by Brett Weinstein, Peterson started out the gate with what sounded like a good idea, which was for him to try to recite to Sam Harris what Sam Harris believes about religion in order to demonstrate that Peterson understood what Harris actually believes, which he would then revise as Harris corrected him until Peterson got to the point where Harris agreed that Peterson understood his position well enough for the debate. However, that really never seemed to happen, to the point where I almost have to wonder if Peterson was ever really trying to legitimately understand Harris's position, but rather it almost seemed as if he was using that tactic as a way to control the flow of debate, to ensure that he basically got to sit up there trying to put words into Harris's mouth as long as possible, so that Harris maybe never had a chance to start asking hard questions for Peterson to answer. Personally, I'm not sure why Harris even put up with it as long as he did, but assertiveness definitely doesn't seem to be the guy's strong suit, as we saw when moronic Ben Affleck was screaming at him while seemingly hopped up on some stimulant on Bill Maher's show a few years back, and thus it dragged on to the point where everybody must have gotten completely frustrated watching it. I was sure frustrated after even 20 minutes of that exchange, and after about an hour or so, Sam Harris was pretty openly just making fun of Peterson and his inability to be direct about his beliefs, basically telling him at one point that it would take a massive amount of mental gymnastics for anybody to follow what exactly Peterson had just said. Which was true, because the audience roared with laughter, as they undoubtedly couldn't follow it, and even Brett Weinstein was giggling a bit, as I recall. Honestly, I watched it while drinking a 6-pack of beer because I knew it would be rather tedious to watch, and I'm kind of glad that I did, because while at first I felt that my buzz was inhibiting my ability to follow the debate, which maybe it was at first when they were still talking about things that loosely made sense easily, eventually, when I was 3 or 4 beers in, all I needed to do was see Peterson repeatedly dodging questions and Harris making people laugh at him without even really trying to embarrass him. When it was over and they tabled it until the next night, and I went and looked to see that they went on for another 2 hours, I decided I might as well not bother, because it honestly pained me to see Peterson be such a weasel, because I actually really like the guy overall. And here's the saddest thing. I think that if I were Peterson, even though I'm probably not as intelligent overall, I could have held my own in that debate. You see, all Peterson really would have had to say would have been to refer to the established societies and nations built around Christianity, mention that they are pretty good overall, that it's a religion that has allowed itself to be revised, unlike some religions, and that it's his belief that this religion must have come from some divine happenings in history, and therefore Christianity was good because Jesus is the Son of God according to him, and the end. Harris's argument was basically that it's unnecessary to be tied to any one specific prophet, set of prophets, or religious doctrine, but Peterson could have easily just said, that might very well be true, but the new religions that have come out since Christianity have by no means proved themselves to be superior. So I'm going to put my faith in what built liberal democracies and defend it and revise it with everything I have, so that people don't turn to postmodernism and Marxist nihilism as an alternative. Or something. That's seriously all he'd have to say, and I have a feeling that Sam Harris would have been happy, and I'm not sure why Peterson wouldn't just say something like that. Now, granted, I'm not really sure what he'd say about what's supposed to happen when Jesus supposedly comes back in the future to round up all the good people for heaven and the bad people for hell. However, he's a smart guy, so I'm sure he could come up with a rationalization about why that likely won't happen in the way that the Bible describes, while still defending the Bible, the same way biblical scholars have done for centuries when they figured out Bible passages don't actually make much sense. I don't know, it just seemed kinda weak and honestly cowardly. That being said, I'm rather torn about even making this video, because I want Peterson to continue on his mission of taking apart the far leftist principles that dominate the establishment in the current year. But I feel I need to be honest about what I saw, because that's what I do with my channel, so that people can learn and grow from that experience of having them debate. If something really great happened during the second half of the debate and I'm not understanding that, please let me know. I mean, I did look at a few parts and it seemed like Harris was still on the high ground, so I didn't really watch. But if I absolutely need to watch another 2 hours of that tedious argument, maybe I will.